The Pentagon has officially canceled the deployment of thousands of troops to Europe. You might be reading headlines and thinking this is another budget cut or a sign of American retreat. The real stakes are far more dangerous than a simple reduction in numbers. This cancellation is not a withdrawal of commitment, but a calculated strategic pivot. By accepting higher risk in Europe, the United States is actively preserving its force generation capacity for the primary threat, a potential conflict with China in the Indo-Pacific. Here is the thing that most policy analysts miss about this decision. It is not about abandoning allies. It is about changing the architecture of how America projects power from a static presence model to a distributed lethality framework. For decades, the United States relied on what strategists call presence-based deterrence. This meant keeping heavy brigade combat teams permanently stationed in places like Poland. The logic was simple and intuitive. If a hostile force saw thousands of American soldiers standing guard, they would not attack. This approach required massive overhead. It meant maintaining large bases, constant rotations, and a rigid hub-and-spoke system where every soldier and tank had to travel through a single, predictable channel to reach the front line. The United States maintained this posture because it was the only way to guarantee an immediate response to any aggression in Europe. But the strategic environment has shifted beneath our feet. The rise of the People's Liberation Army in the Pacific has forced Washington to confront a binary choice. The U.S. military cannot simultaneously sustain high-intensity readiness in two distinct theaters without a surge capability that simply does not exist today. Because of this constraint, the Pentagon has made a hard calculation. They are trading the insurance policy of a forward-deployed heavy brigade in Europe for the offensive capability required to contest the Indo-Pacific. This is a fundamental shift in the risk calculus for European allies. Quick resource note. I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. The specific trigger for this pivot was the cancellation of the 117th Infantry Brigade Combat Team's deployment to Poland. This unit was already relocated and preparing for its rotation. The sudden order to cancel the deployment signals a deliberate move away from static, high-overhead troop rotations. Instead, the U.S. is moving toward a strategy of distributed lethality. This concept relies on scattering lower-footprint assets across a wider area rather than concentrating them in one heavy hub. The goal is to make the force harder to target and more flexible, but it inherently accepts a higher near-term risk of escalation. If a conflict were to start tomorrow in Europe, the response time would be slower than in the past. The U.S. is effectively telling its European partners that the era of guaranteed instant heavy armor response is over. This logistical chaos highlights the fragility of legacy force projection models. When you pivot from a hub-and-spoke system to a multi-theater strategy, the old supply chains break down. Soldiers who had already moved to Poland faced sudden redeployment orders, creating administrative and operational friction that no amount of planning could fully smooth over. This friction is not a bug, it is a feature of the transition. It shows that the United States is actively dismantling the rigid unit rotations that defined the post-Cold War era. The new architecture must prioritize modular, non-linear deployment chains over those rigid structures. The decision to cancel a specific brigade deployment rather than a general drawdown indicates a targeted reallocation of high-readiness kinetic assets. The Pentagon is not cutting the force, it is repositioning it. The trade-off is explicit. The United States is accepting a denial theater in Europe, where the response is slower, to ensure a victory theater in the Pacific, where the response must be immediate. This changes the nature of the alliance. European security can no longer rely on the physical presence of American heavy units as the primary deterrent. It must now rely on the threat of a rapid, albeit delayed, kinetic response and the broader strategic weight of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. This pivot exposes a critical failure mode in current force planning. The inability to sustain high-intensity readiness in two distinct theaters without a surge capability forces a binary choice. The U.S. is choosing to treat the Pacific as the decisive theater. In the Pacific, the United States needs to contest the sea lanes and the airspace with overwhelming force. In Europe, the strategy shifts to denial. This means making it so costly for an adversary to advance that they do not attempt it, rather than guaranteeing that they cannot advance. This is a more complex and dangerous strategy than simple deterrence. It requires precise intelligence, rapid mobilization, and a willingness to absorb higher initial risk. The implications for the next decade are profound. By treating Europe as a denial theater, the United States is forcing its allies to take on a greater share of the burden in the near term. The strategic message is clear. The United States is prioritizing the threat that poses an existential challenge to its global standing over the threat that has been present for decades. This is not a retreat, it is a recalibration of the global balance of power. The United States is betting that its ability to project power in the Pacific will outweigh the risks of a slower response in Europe. The cancellation of the 17th Infantry Brigade Combat Team deployment is the first major signal of this new reality. It marks the end of the era where the U.S. could afford to keep its most powerful units split between two oceans. The future of American strategy is defined by this trade-off. The United States is accepting higher risk in Europe to preserve the force generation capacity required to win a potential conflict in the Indo-Pacific. This is the realpolitik of the 21st century. It is a choice between two theaters, and the decision has been made. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.